For today's video, we are going to be doing yet another one from every team video, but this is kind of going to be a prediction video tied into a one from every team video because I'm going to be predicting every NHL team's leading scorer heading into next season. And if you guys have any suggestions on one from every team videos that you want to see, make sure to let me know down in the comment section below. And also, before we get into today's video, make sure you go down in the links in the description and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also starting to use Patreon a lot more, so you can become a Patreon if you'd like. The first 11 will be in a fantasy hockey league with me this season, so if that is something you're interested in, click the links down below in the description. And now, without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video, starting off with the Anaheim Ducks. For the Anaheim Ducks, I went with Rickard Rakell. Definitely wouldn't be surprised if Ryan Getzlaf is the leading scorer if he stays healthy, but in my opinion, Getzlaf is probably going to miss a couple of games, and I hope Rickard Rakell can stay healthy for at least 80 plus, because if he does, I think he can be a guy in the 65 to 75 point range, and in my opinion, he is going to be the leading scorer for Anaheim next year. Moving along now to the Arizona Coyotes, my pick is Phil Kessel. Was a point per game this past season with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I could see him being in the 80 to 90 point range next year for the Arizona Coyotes, now that he is basically the #1 offensive option on this team. This is another team, though, I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Clayton Keller has a breakout season and in the end is their leading scorer next season, but I'm going to go with the safe pick, and I think that's going to be Phil Kessel. The next team is the Boston Bruins, and my pick is David Pastrnak, but I would not disagree with you guys if you think it should be Brad Marchand or Patrice Bergeron. Anyone on that amazing top line I could really see being the leading scorer for Boston come the end of next year. I'm with Pastrnak, though, because in my opinion, he can be like a 50 goal scorer and a guy who's in the 95 to 105 point range, especially if he stays healthy. I mean, he had 81 points this past season in 66 games. David Pastrnak is super talented, and I would not be surprised if he's one of the leading scorers in the entire NHL next year. For the Buffalo Sabres, a pretty easy pick in my opinion. I think it has to be Jack Eichel, especially if he stays healthy. Last year had 82 points in 77 games, was over a point per game, a fantastic year for him, and next year I honestly think he's just going to take that up a notch and be a guy who could potentially be like a 90 plus point scorer, thus most likely making him the leading scorer on Buffalo. Moving along now to the Calgary Flames, it's got to be Johnny Gaudreau. 99 points this past season. He was fantastic. A lot of guys on the Calgary Flames had a career year, and I think there is a real possibility that we could see some clawback in the numbers of some of their players. So for my projection, I have him in the 90 to 100 point range. I wouldn't be surprised if he scores like 95 or 90 points and, has a little bit of a decline in his numbers, but then again, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a 100 plus point scorer for the first time in his career. A fantastic player, and I definitely think if he's healthy, he will be their leading scorer next year. For the Carolina Hurricanes, this was another easy one. I went with Sebastian Aho. He had 83 points this past season, over a point per game for the first time in his young career. He's fantastic. I think he's only going to continue to get better, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the 85 to 95 point range in this up-and-coming season and really solidifies himself as a superstar in this league. Next up, we have the Chicago Blackhawks, and even though I think his numbers will not be the same as they were this past season, I still think it's safe to say Patty Kane will probably be the leading scorer for Chicago. I have him in the 85 to 95 point range. I can't really see him being a 110 point scorer again, but Patty Kane is fantastic, and if he has another really good offensive year, then he definitely could be a 100 plus point scorer. And a dark horse for this team might be Alex DeBrincat. He could definitely have a breakout season, and if Patty Kane gets hurt or something like that, then DeBrincat definitely could be their leading scorer, but the safe pick 100% is Patrick Kane. For the Colorado Avalanche, another very easy one. I went with Nathan MacKinnon. He had 99 points this past season, and for my projection of his point total next year, I have him in the 95 to 105 point range. He's one of my favorite players in the league. I really hope he finally hits 100 points. He's definitely one of the top centers in the NHL, and I think he is a really safe bet as the leading scorer for Colorado next season. For the Columbus Blue Jackets, I went with Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Cam Atkinson has a really good offensive year and ends up leading them in points, and I also wouldn't be surprised if maybe a guy like Seth Jones is up there as one of their leading scorers. But in the end, my pick is Pierre-Luc Dubois. 61 points this past season. I only think he's going to continue to get better, and for my point projection for him, I have him in the 65 to 75 point range. For the Dallas Stars, I think this one was relatively easy as well. I went with Tyler Seguin, 80 points this past season, and if I had to guess his point total next year, I think it'll be somewhere in between the 70 to 80 point range. There is some other very good options like Alex Radulov, Jamie Benn. Maybe you could even throw Joe Pavelski or John Klingberg's name into the conversation, but in the end, I think Tyler Seguin, if healthy, will be their leading scorer by the end of next season. Moving on now to the Detroit Red Wings, I think I can confidently say as a Red Wings fan that Dylan Larkin is most likely going going to be our leading scorer next year. 73 points this past season in 76 games. And if I had to guess his point total next year, I think it'll probably be in the 70 to 80 point range. Kind of like a little bit under a point per game like he was this past season. I don't really see Larkin as a guy who will ever be like an 85 to 90 point player. I certainly hope so, but even still, I think at this point in time, he's definitely going to be the player Detroit relies on most to put up points. For the Edmonton Oilers, no surprise here, I have Connor McDavid. I would be shocked if he doesn't score 100 points again this up and coming year. He had 116 this past season in 78 games, and if I had to guess, I think he'll probably be in the 110 to 120 point range, but I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if he exceeds that number. He's that good of a player. For the Florida Panthers, I decided to go with Alexander Barkov. He had 96 points this past season, and next year I think he'll probably be in the 95 to 105 point range, and if he puts up point totals like that and is still one of the better two-way players in the entire NHL, I wouldn't be surprised by the end of next season that Alexander Barkov is one of the favorites to win the Hart Trophy. For the Los Angeles Kings, my pick is Anze Kopitar. He only had 60 points this past season, which is definitely a down year for him, considering how amazing he was in the 2017-18 season, but I honestly don't think he'll get back to that, MVP caliber play. I think he'll probably finish in the 65 to 75 point range in this up and coming season, and if he does put up those type of numbers, he will definitely be their leading scorer. For the Minnesota Wild, this was one of the ones where I kind of just took a shot in the dark. I actually went with Matthew Dumba. He had 22 points this past season in 32 games. For a defenseman, those are some really good numbers, and I think there is a strong possibility that if healthy next year, he's in the 55 to 65 point range, and if he puts up those type of points, I think that does make him a top contender to be their leading scorer. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a guy like Zach Parise again, or Eric Stahl, or a player like that, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say it's going to be Matt Dumba. For the Montreal Canadiens, my pick is Max Domi. He was their leading scorer this past year with 72 points in 82 games, and next year I think he'll do something similar, be in the 70 to 80 point range, and if he is in that type of range in terms of his points, I think he most likely will be their leading scorer, unless a guy like Jonathan Drouin has a breakout year, or Thomas Tatar has a really good season, or Brendan Gallagher, or something like that, but I definitely think the most likely pick has to be Max Domi. For the Nashville Predators, I went with Philip Forsberg, but this one was actually difficult because they just have a lot of players that I think are very good, and I could really see putting up similar numbers. You look at guys like Ryan Johansson, Matt Duchene, who they just brought in, Victor Arvidsson, Roman Josi can definitely put up a lot of points. There's just a lot of very solid players, but in the end, my pick is Forsberg. He had 50 points last year in 64 games, and if he stays healthy next year, I think he realistically could be in the 75 to 85 point range and really be a point per game player, so that's why I decided to go with Forsberg for Nashville. Moving on now to the New Jersey Devils, my pick is Taylor Hall. He had 37 points last year in 33 games, and I think if healthy next year, he will be an 85 to 95 point scorer. Not quite at the level he was in his MVP season in 2017-2018, but definitely still one of the top wingers in the entire league. For the New York Islanders, an easy pick here. I went with Matthew Barzal, 62 points last year, and if I had to guess next year, I think he'll probably be in the 70 to 80 point range, another step forward in trying to get back to the point total that he did put up in his rookie season. Matthew Barzal is definitely the best forward on this team, and a guy that they're really going to rely on to put up big numbers, and I think he's going to do well in that role again next season, so I have him as their leading scorer. For the New York Rangers, I went with Artemi Panarin, the new guy. He had 87 points last year in 79 games, a fantastic offensive season, and next year I have him in the 80 to 90 point range. Once again, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if maybe a guy like Mika Zibanejad has an amazing season, and maybe Panarin misses some games with injury, and then Zibanejad is their leading scorer, but if healthy, I think it'll 100% be Artemi Panarin. Moving on to the Ottawa Senators, I went with Thomas Chabot. He was amazing last year, 55 points in 70 games, and I think if he plays like 75 or 80 games next year, he could definitely be in the 60 to 70 point range, and honestly, if he is in that point range, I think he'll definitely be their leading scorer. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Brady Tkachuk ends up leading them in points either, but in the end, I think my pick has to be Thomas Chabot. For the Philadelphia Flyers, this is probably an unpopular pick. I went with Sean Couturier actually over Claude Giroux. Couturier had 76 points last year in 80 games, a fantastic season, and next year I could see him being in the 75 to 85 point range and maybe even being like over a point per game. And when I think about Claude Giroux, I honestly think 75 to 85 points is in the cards for him. I think they're going to have similar numbers, but I'm actually just going to go out on a limb and give the edge to Sean Couturier and have my prediction as him for their leading scorer next year. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, a very easy pick here. I think it has to be Sidney Crosby. He just had another 100-point season in just 79 games, and I think next year he'll probably be in the 90 to 100-point range once again if he's healthy. I wouldn't rule out a guy like Evgeny Malkin if Crosby does miss a couple of games with injury, but I think he has to be my pick because you can never really bet against Sidney Crosby. He's just been so amazing for his whole career. Next up, we have the San Jose Sharks, and my pick is Timo Meier. This one might be unpopular, kind of like the Philadelphia pick, and it might be Brent Burns again or a guy like Erik Karlsson, but Timo Meier, in my opinion, is going to be their best scoring forward next year. 68 points this past season, and next year I honestly think he's going to be in the 70 to 80 point range, be like a 40 goal scorer. I think Timo Meier has only scratched the surface on what he's going to be able to be capable of in his career. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Burns or Karlsson, but I'm going to go out and say my pick is Timo Meier. Next up, we have the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, and this one was difficult. I was debating between Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly, but I can't really see Ryan O'Reilly scoring like he did in the playoffs. I think that's probably going to drop off a little bit in the regular season, so I went with Tarasenko. 68 points last year. I definitely think he's capable of more than that. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like point per game with 40 goals, but my projection is like 65 to 70 points, and if he's up there and the mid to high 70s, I definitely think he'll be their leading scorer. For the Tampa Bay Lightning, no surprise here, I went with Nikita Kucherov. 128 points this past season, and next year I think he'll probably drop off a little bit and be in like the 110 to 120 point range, and if he's still in that range, I think he'll definitely be their leading scorer. They have a lot of other really good players though, like Stamkos, Victor Hedman, and Braden Point, but I can't really see any of those guys coming close to like the 110 and 120 point range like I think Kucherov will. For the Toronto Maple Leafs, my pick is actually Austin Matthews, but I do not blame you guys if you think it'll be John Tavares or Mitch Marner, because those are definitely really good picks as well. But for some reason, I just have this feeling that Matthews is going to stay healthy and have an amazing season. He had 73 points last year in 68 games, and honestly with him, I think it's just a matter of him not being injured and playing like 75 plus games, and if he does, I think he will be in that 95 to 105 point range. I think Mitch Marner will be too, but like I said, for some reason, I just think Matthews is going to have a monster year. For the Vancouver Canucks, another pretty easy pick. I went with Elias Pettersson. He had 66 points last year in 71 games, an amazing rookie season, and next year I kind of have him in the 80 to 90 point range as the certified best player and obviously the best point producer on this Vancouver team. He's going to have some other very good players, Bo Horvat's going to be up there in points, same with Brock Besser, but I don't think either of those guys will come close to Elias Pettersson's numbers next year. Next up, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, and this is another team that has a lot of options to choose from. Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, William Karlsson, that whole line is fantastic. Max Pacioretty, Paul Stastny, maybe, probably not so much, but he's still going to put up decent numbers in my opinion. But I think I have to go with Mark Stone, one of the top wingers in the entire NHL, 73 points this past year. I think he'll be in the 80 to 90 point range next season, and definitely be in contention for the Selke Trophy as well. I'm a big Mark Stone fan, and I think he's going to have a monster year for Vegas. For the Caps, I went with Alex Ovechkin. He was fantastic last year, was their leading scorer with 89 points, and I think next year he'll probably be in that 80 to 90 point range once again. Wouldn't blame you guys if your pick is like Evgeny Kuznetsov or maybe even John Carlson or Nick Backstrom, but in my opinion, Ovechkin still has a couple years left in him of being an amazing offensive player, and for that reason, he's my pick for the Caps as their leading scorer next year. And now finally, finishing out the video with the Winnipeg Jets, and I went with Mark Scheifele. 84 points last year, wasn't their leading scorer, that was actually Blake Wheeler, but I think next year we're finally going to see Blake Wheeler decline a little bit and maybe be like in the 75 to 85 point range, and I think Mark Scheifele is still only getting better, and for that reason I think he will be their leading scorer in like the 85 or 95 point range. Wouldn't be surprised if he's like a 90 point scorer next year. I think he's that good. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Like I said at the start, make sure to let me know down in the comment section any video suggestions that you guys want to see, whether it's a prediction video, a one from every team video. I'm always open to hearing new ideas, and thank you guys all so much for the support lately. And with all that being said, make sure to drop a like on the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.